Hi stamping friends, this is Melissa Kerman with Melissa's Crafting Treehouse. For today's project, we're going to be playing with some fun watercolor background ideas with a fall color scheme. I'll be using the Love of Leaves stamp set and the Stamparatus to create my project. This is a club and free card kit project, so if you get a kit from me, this is super easy to put together. Now the first thing I'm going to do to get started is I want to set up my Stamparatus. So I've put my cardstock where I want it in the Stamparatus, and then I'll place my images down onto the cardstock where I want them to be. And then I simply close the hinged plastic plate, press down, and that will lift the images up onto the plastic plate, and then I can stamp those images in exactly the same place every time. Keep in mind, you'll want to make note of the grid lines on your background to make sure that your cardstock is positioned in the same place each time. You may also want to use a little bit of adhesive on the back side of your cardstock to make sure it stays in place, in addition to using the magnets to hold the cardstock down. This is very important because I will likely be stamping my images more than once to get a nice, solid, crisp image. Now I'll be heat embossing my images, so I first started with rubbing my cardstock with my embossing buddy, and now I'm inking up my images with my Versamark. It's also really handy to have a stamp set underneath the plastic plate to provide a solid surface for inking up your image. And then I'm going to go ahead and stamp my images onto my cardstock. Now I'm going to go ahead and ink this up again and stamp it a second time, and this is fine to do, of course, as long as my cardstock has stayed in place. Now the images in this stamp set are not completely solid images. That's part of why I'm stamping it twice. I want to make sure the images are as solid as they possibly can be. The more solid images provide a little bit more contrast between the images themselves and the background, which I really like. So I've covered my cardstock in white embossing powder, and now I'm heating it to melt those images. While I heat emboss my images, I want to point out something that may not be obvious to everyone, and that is that when I stamped my images, they came out clear. Versamark is a clear, sticky ink, and I wanted to make sure that my images would not be overlapped. If I had stamped them one at a time, it would have been really difficult to get them in exactly the spot that I wanted them. So using my Stamparatus allowed me to get my images exactly where I wanted them to be without worrying about them overlapping. Next, I'm going to start showing you some of the backgrounds that I created and the different ways that I did that. Now to do this technique, I'm using the smooth side of a Stamparatus plate, but you can really use any surface that's plastic like this one. And I'm starting with my Daffodil Delight ink pad and covering the center with that Daffodil Delight color. Now I'm starting with my lightest color so as to prevent any contamination of my lighter colors. So if I overlap that Pear Pizzazz a little bit over my yellow, I'm not too worried about it, but vice versa would be a problem. And now I'm just putting in some touches of Old Olive ink. Next I'm going to take my spritzer bottle with water in it and spray it generously. This will help to blend the colors. And I'm using a plain piece of white cardstock. I've chosen here to do my background before I do my heat embossing, but you can do the reverse as well. And then I'm just pressing my cardstock down onto my wet inky surface. Now each background is going to be a little bit different. As you can see, I have some white spots, so I'm just going back in and selectively putting more color in the places that I want those particular colors to be. Now this is just plain Whisper White cardstock. It's not watercolor paper. And now I'm just spraying my surface a little bit to blend those colors because I still want to add some more colors in various places. And you can see I'm even rubbing it at times. And here's my first finished background. Here's another background done in exactly the same way, clearly with just more water, so it was more blended. For my second background, I'm going to play around with varying things just a little bit. I'm going to start with adding my ink to my surface, just like I did before, and I'm going to spray it generously with water. Now you'll notice I have a piece off to the left that I've already heat embossed, and in that case, I've heat embossed it in gold just to mix things up a bit. And then I'm going to actually spray on some isopropyl alcohol, some rubbing alcohol. And this is going to change the texture of the ink just a little bit, as you'll see. Makes it sort of bead up. And then I'm taking my focal piece and placing it down onto that wet surface. The alcohol will also allow it to dry a little bit quicker. So I could leave it just like this, or I can turn it back over and pull up more ink from the surface. And I want a little bit more bumblebee in there. So this is actually really pretty, just the way it is. But I'm still going to fill it in just a bit more. And I'm just putting the bumblebee in the middle because that's where I have an open space. Spraying it with alcohol. And then I'm just going to dab it around, adding some more color. And I think I'm going to stop there. Now, since I've already heat embossed on this piece, it's a little bit difficult to tell how this background piece differs from the first one. So here's a background that I created just like the one I just finished, where I put ink on my surface, sprayed it with water, and then sprayed it with the alcohol. As you can see, there's a lot more texture once I added the alcohol versus using just water. Now I tried one more method for creating a background, and in this case I used alcohol first and then I ended up using water. I didn't particularly like how it turned out, so I'm not going to actually show you, but I did want to show you the different focal pieces that I created all side by side. So the one on the right is just with water. The one in the middle is the one where I used alcohol first and then water. And then the one on the left is the one you saw me create, where I used water and then I sprayed with alcohol. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can heat emboss first and then do your background, or you can do your background first and then stamp your images over the top. If you stamp your images second, you'll just want to make sure that your background is bone dry before you heat emboss on it. Otherwise, your powder will stick in all kinds of places that you don't want it to. And if you do your heat embossing first and apply the ink second, you'll want to rub the surfaces of those heat embossed areas just to remove any excess ink that may be sitting on the surface. Now I created one additional variation for this card, and the background that you see right here was actually done in a slightly different color scheme. I used the same two greens, Old Olive and Pear Pizzazz, but in place of the bumblebee I used crushed curry, and in place of the cinnamon cider I used pumpkin pie. So the color scheme is a little bit brighter. In addition, instead of heat embossing on my background, I've used some soft suede ink and inked up those same images, of course, on my Stamparatus and stamped them twice onto that background. When you use a dark ink like this, you can really see the texture of those images much better than when you use heat embossing. Now for this background piece, I've just used a 1/4 sheet of Whisper White cardstock. So now I'm going to die cut it with one of my rectangle stitched framelits. Now if you're using the new Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine by Stampin' Up, you'll use the base platform, which is labeled number 1, and then you'll use the spacer, which is labeled number 2, and then you'll need 2 of the cutting plates that are labeled number 3. So you'll start with that number 1, 2, and 3 labeled pieces on your Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. And then you'll place your cardstock down, the die on top of it, and then another number 3 cutting plate on the top. And then you'll just simply run it through the machine. Now, if you're receiving a free card kit from me to make this project, your white piece will be die cut for you. That said, you may want to play around with some 1/4 sheets of white cardstock before you do your background that's already die cut, just to experiment and play. As you can see, I've played with a lot of different options and it was a lot of fun. So next I'm going to assemble one of my cards, and I'm going to be using one of the focal pieces that has white heat embossing on it. And I'm going to start with stamping my sentiment on a little strip of cinnamon cider cardstock. Now I'm stamping in early espresso ink, and I've justified my image far to the right because I'll be cutting a banner off of the left side of this strip. I'm going to start by cutting off some of the excess cardstock with my paper snips, and then I'm going to cut up the center just a little bit and then cut in from the corner to the center to create my banner on both sides. Now I've dry embossed a layer of Pear Pizzazz cardstock. You can make this card without it being dry embossed if you want. If you receive a kit from me in the mail, it will not be dry embossed. I've used the subtle 3D embossing folder, or you can use something similar if you choose to emboss yours. And this layer just gets placed on the card body. And then I've got a piece of cinnamon cider, which is going to be attached in the center. You may want to attach the cinnamon cider piece to your Pear Pizzazz first, in case it hangs off the edge a little bit. It's a hair long on mine, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it down off camera. Now I've got an inside Whisper White piece. I'm just going to attach that to the inside. And my focal piece is going to get attached to a piece of old olive cardstock. And my focal piece is die cut using a rectangle stitched framelit. And if you're receiving a kit, your piece will already be die cut. And then I'm going to attach the rest of my pieces together to finish off my card. And there's my finished card. And here's a couple others that I've created as well. And you can see they each turn out a little bit different. As a reminder, this is a club and free card kit project. This is one of a set of 3 projects you can receive for free. Here's a photo of the contents of these 3 project kits. Most people qualify for one each of 3 kits. And here are some sneak peeks of the other 2 projects. In-person club members will make this project during the September 2020 club event. Online club members will receive a kit to make this project in October 2020. And free card kit recipients will receive this project kit for qualifying online orders placed in October or November. Customers who place an order in both months will receive an alternate gift for the second order. To get free card kits, all you have to do is place a qualifying order in my online store. Plus, first-time customers get all 3 kits regardless of the order size. To learn more about how you can get free card kits, check out the link in the video description below. I hope you enjoyed my project today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and happy crafting!